Okay. So lowering overhead. Again, getting paid and paying less are probably the two major business concerns of physicians, as we all know. And so as Terry was saying, this is a good segue into this conversation, overhead also does matter. Again, the bigger practices, they have more people to share the overhead over. The smaller guys don't. And so asking all of those questions of your physician so that you can get, very specific contextual pointers to then point you where to do your filter so that you get a very true apples to apples comparison on what's actually fair up against whatever his buddy or some article was saying. So on the next slide, you'll see a snapshot of our core reports as it relates to overhead. This is overhead per full-time employed physician and the percentage of overhead by total revenue. Both of these reports serve very specific and really good purposes. And as you can see, they all start out with 0 filters. Compensation models, like we've said, can affect overhead. Eat what you kill models. Not only are you getting, everything that you've brought in revenue, but then specific overhead that's specific to you or shared overhead, all of those formulas, they have an impact on the overhead. And so keeping your particular compensation models in mind when you look at this data is very important. Any thoughts here from my other two panelists?
I would just say that, these reports are key because, first, to determine if you need to lower overhead, you need to determine if there's a problem. And how are you going to know if you're just looking at data from your practice? You need to be able to see what's going on, again, not just regionally, but nationwide in practices of the same kind of scope and makeup. So, because you may be doing very well in something or think you're doing very well in something, but when you look at the numbers, you find out maybe you're not, and you may be doing better in some areas than you thought. So, we found a major problem here in an area that we thought we were doing well in, but when we looked at the reports, it found out we weren't, and we were able to delve into the problem and get it resolved. So, again, you have to define if there's a problem, and the only way to define that is being able to look at the data and compare your practice to it.
And am I right in remembering, Terry, without giving away too many details that you might not want to share publicly, but wasn't the filters by line of service what helped you find that?
Yeah, we had an issue. We thought we were being, I'll speak freely about it, we thought we were being really good and efficient and doing really well with MRI because our MRI was paid for and it was running at full capacity. But when the numbers came in, our revenue per scan was not where a lot of other people were, and it couldn't really be attributed to payer mix because we were in a similar payer mix to the rest of the people in our region, and so that wasn't a factor. And when we drilled down into it, we found out we were paying a lot more than other people on read fees, and we were able to renegotiate that, and now we're in line with the averages. So again, we thought we were doing well and would have never known there was a problem if we didn't get the information out of the benchmarking survey.
Yeah, that's really great. And there are other things to consider too. Staffing levels. You can look at, okay, for a practice this size, we have this many full-time staff. Well, ours is higher. Well, that's okay. Higher isn't necessarily a bad thing. That's where you want to look at the percentage of overhead by total revenue then, because you may have, higher staffing than your peers, but if your percentage of overhead by revenue is lower, that means those staff are actually bringing in, help bringing in more money. And so to look at just a single report doesn't often give you a full picture. Other things need to be looked at as well. And so pairing these reports side by side is really helpful because one piece of the pie or one perspective often isn't the whole picture. Tara, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would echo that and just, again, remember that when you're sharing this information with your physicians, you really do need to share the whole picture of it. When we were prepping for this, Terry was discussing how he shows past overhead, current overhead, and then kind of where the practice falls. And we do something similar here just so that, there's going to be ebbs and flows in your practice depending on multiple different factors. And so it's kind of good to have that historic data, which is why I find it's really helpful to participate year over year, because you can kind of compare it to your past performance on here, and you can kind of see, did our overhead go up? Was there a specific reason? Did we add a physician? Did we add a service line? Those type of things are really helpful when you're explaining this, because then the physicians aren't just looking at a number saying, well, our overhead's too high. Now you have data behind that, why it's high.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we lost a PA last year, and of course, you lose a revenue generating employee, your revenue is going to go down. But looking when we did our end of year analysis, seeing that drop was a little bit concerning at first. But then if you looked at the data against the individual physicians and not just the entire company, all the providers that we had were still well within the benchmarks. And so it was really that one contextual piece of that PA that we lost that revenue for a time until they were replaced. And so sometimes you do need to pick off your individual physicians out of it too, and not just look at the whole company, because those individual little pieces can make the big picture look like it's changed a lot, but really individually everybody's still performing really, really well. If we can go to the next slide. And so this particular snapshot shows what would be your practice with that black bar right next to the results. Just to give you an idea, so there's overhead per full-time employed physician and percentage. Again, it's really nice to be able to see the trend data across the industry as well. But again, you can change via the filters where those trends are going based on your population size, based on your practice size. All of those filters are really great. Anything else, Tara or Terry, that you can think of on these slides?
No, not from me.
No, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the same thing, just kind of the same. Make sure you're looking at all the different factors that you can filter in and look at the whole picture.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, with staffing, I know that, physicians are taught pretty much that staff are, which they are, they make up a large part of overhead. It also makes them resistant to hiring staff when they need to. I know in my own case, we were growing our practice and we had one biller for a long time, and for a long time, that's all we needed. And as we grew, we came to the point where we needed another biller, and that was proposed to them, and they agreed, but they agreed under duress is a little bit harsh, but they weren't super excited about adding yet another staff member with all the other changes going on. And so what I made sure to do is the day that we hired our new biller, I took a snapshot of our days in AR and our payer mixes and all those things, and then 30 days or 90 days after that employee had been here, we reduced our days in AR by almost half. And so I was able to show them, yes, we added this expense, but this person, because they're able to work the aging alongside our original biller, your money's coming in twice as quickly as it was before. And so they've pretty much, paid for themselves in the first, 90 to 120 days. So those things are really important to look at as well. As it's not just about the bottom line number of staff. Those things need to grow proportionally. And again, if they're bringing in more revenue, then that's where that percentage, you can go back and show them, okay, it's increased. Yes, our number of staff has, increased, but so is your revenue. Anything else from Terry and Tara before we go on to the last scenario? Do you have any questions?
I'm good.
Did you skip that last slide, Olivia? I had something on that last one.
Oh, sure, go for it.
Yeah, to me, the slide here, the graph about staff costs as a percentage of revenue, for me, that's always been one of the most important ones, because if you're talking about lowering overhead, you're talking about being efficient, because, if you're maximizing revenue and keeping expenses down, and I think for most all of us, our biggest expense outside of physician compensation is probably staff cost. So if we can keep staff costs low while maximizing revenue, that's important. And where this slide or this data has really helped me is, you have some doctors who are really caught up on that full-time employee per physician. And my clinic is at the high end of that scale, but at the low end of this scale. So to me, being able to look at data from different data sets within the survey has really helped. Because again, if you're trying to lower overhead, you're trying to be efficient. And to me, the best gauge of being efficient is if you have a low staff cost as a percent of revenue. So I think that can be really helpful to people instead of some people that just, or some physicians that just look at that, well, we're overstaffed because, the MGMA or the Beckett's or whoever says we should have, 4.5 employees per FTE. Well, that might not be the case if you're using those employees efficiently and generating revenue with them. So I just wanted to make that point on that one, that there are this is a perfect example of data sets that need to work together to help you illustrate your point to physicians.
Yeah, and the thing that I love about AOE data is that it's most of our members are from independent practices or smaller practices. We do have large practice members, obviously, but they're not. Where MGMA gets most of their data, a lot of their orthopedics is from a hospital setting. And so a hospital setting in orthopedics is a totally different ballgame than people who are still in independent practice. And so to be able to look at this data and know that it is the most accurate to the context that we all work in every single day, and to be able to really compare those, apples to oranges, because in a hospital they may have, totally different staffing ratios because they're much larger organizations and things are spread out differently. So it's really important to take back to your physicians that this is the most accurate data to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.